just perhaps put these down? I think it might make it a bit easier. Because what I'm going to take you to South India to Tamil Nadu, because that was the first place that I actually went when I arrived in India. I first went to India with CUSA, the Indian University Service Overseas. And for those of you that don't know what CUSA is, it's a volunteer organization, and it was set up, actually set up before the Peace Corps, and many people after they graduated from university decided that they would go and work in another country. And so I chose India. And so initially, that is what took me to India. You can imagine Canada in 1964. We had, of course, people from the High Commission, and we knew, but there weren't any Indian restaurants or anything. I really knew nothing about India when I set out. And I have to say that the first Indian meal I had, I hated it. It was horrible. But everybody said it was horrible anyway, so it had nothing to do with just the food was bad. So I set out for India in 64, and I was assigned to a place in Tamil Nadu, which was actually in Chittambaram. And in Chittambaram, that is where the great temple of Nataraja is, to Shiva. So going to South India and actually passing through the gateways and seeing all these marvelous carvings of dancers is what made me decide to study Indian dance. So I'm going to take you there now so you can have some idea of what South India is like. Here it is. So we can turn up the lights, I think, now. I'll move over here. So here we are. We're in South India, and I thought for many of you that would like to rekindle the joy of what it was like a long time ago without smog and lots of cars, this is what the South Indian temple looked like. This is an old photograph, but as you can see, there are the four gateways, the four gopura, which you enter inside. And of course, inside it was where the dancing took place, right inside the sanctum. Because Indian dance was part of temple ritual. What you see now is performed on the concert stage. I will be speaking specifically about one style of dance, Bharatanatyam, which originated in the temples of and in the area of South India. And as you know, there are many styles of Indian dance, and so I'll try to deal with some of them later. So we have this then was a temple town then that I was introduced to, and there I learned about India. You can see the gopuras of the gateways, and those of you who have visited India know that there are little stories that are depicted. And so it's very much going into a cathedral, a medieval cathedral, in which the Christian stories are depicted. And so the stories within Hinduism are depicted on the walls of the temples. And it was that way that I learned about Hinduism and I learned about India. It was just actually on the spot and participating in society. As I said, what inspired me about studying Indian dance was, first of all, I had done dance in Canada. Secondly, when you enter the great temples, many of these great temples in South India, the Chola temple, you'll see the gateway, and you'll see the carvings of the different dance postures. Now, a gateway is about as wide as this room right here. So we would be going into the gateway, and then there'd be these huge walls going up here with all the carvings from the text, the 5th century text, the Natya Shastra. The Natya Shastra is a Sanskrit text written to codify the theatrical and the musical and the dramatic parts of dance and of theater. And so each posture then has a name. What you'll notice is that this is not like the dance that you see now. The dance is quite different. So we can see that the dance has evolved and changed, and so it has since the time that I started studying the dance too. What I found very interesting, though, was it did codify the shapes. And when you look at Indian dance is very, nothing in particular, it's as if you are in the wall of the temple. So your shoulders will be like this. It's very angular. Sometimes you move sideways like this. But basically, it's very angular, moving this way. And so you can see that. The knees are bent. You can see how the knees are bent? So you're walking along like this, your knees are bent. Then, the arms are going to be like this. The hands are important. So let's look at these different postures. You can see the arms are like this or like this. Now you can see I am in the wall of the temple. You see how like this? So when I'm teaching, I take my students and I push them right back against the wall and say, look, you see how I have to be right there in actually part of it. So what inspired me was seeing these different sculptures, and then I thought it would be very interesting to study the dance. So again, we can have just some idea of the shapes. And you'll notice that she's showing an elephant. Everybody put their left hand here by your ear. Here we go. This is your left hand. Here we go. Actually, put your right hand, then it'll be just the same as the So here's the ear of the elephant. Everyone's got the ear of the elephant, then you've got the trunk. Put your trunk here. Okay, now we've got the water. And then go like it and throw it over your head. And then see the water coming out. So you can see here that here, what she's showing is so grab your ears. Now you've got to only show your ears. Everyone got your ears. Now show your trunk. Now, this is an erotic gesture. She's showing that you should have hips as large as an elephant. But everybody shows a big large hips. Right here. So actually, this image, we think it just is showing an elephant, but in fact it's showing, see, the large hips. And you should walk. You're very attractive, like an elephant. You see how I'm slow? No haste at all. No haste at all. So you walk very slowly like this. So we have walking like an elephant. So all of these images are on the walls of these different temples. They are in texts, and they are being performed. At the time when I started studying the dance, there were still many traditional people teaching the dance. Because as in most cases in India, certain activities were involved with certain castes. And in South India, the Ishe Balala, this particular caste of people, they have within their community dance teachers, dancers, and musicians. That's not to say that only people from that caste did it, because there were also high caste people, Brahmins and others, that were involved in the music, but not with the dance. The dance in any society, anything to do with dance or theater, in any society, is usually considered somehow lower. And as we know, within the West, I mean, theatrical people were not even allowed to be buried in a churchyard because of the activity that you were involved in. So we have then, within India, a certain caste that I studied with. They're called the Ishe Lalala. So their families, generations, had taught dance. So here's a picture of me at Mahabalipuram. You can no longer take that picture because after the tsunami, things got a bit destroyed. But anyway, so here I am at Mahabalipuram. Tony took the photograph, and if you can believe it, I'm saying, Tony, the wave is going to go over the camera. I look very calm, but you see Tony standing in the sea, and there was this huge wave coming, just going to come over there. So it's not as calm as it appears. And also, we got up at very early in the morning to take this photograph. And then all the lights had gone out in the hotel, so we had this flashlight that was putting on my makeup, and then we just get down to the water, and we find out there must have been 3,000 pilgrims that were going to take their bath. But they were so nice. They all just pushed back, and they all just watched around. So what you see in this picture is not actually what was really happening, because it was quite an exciting morning. Now here we have the, I just thought you might like to see this, it's actually in Chitambara. And music still is very much part of the ritual. And the reason why I've included this is because originally dancers were part of the ritual. So one way of worshiping God was to have a dancer and sing the songs in praise. But these dancers were also used in the court. So there was this dual purpose, but often the repertoire was the same. So we have a Nagaswaram player, and we have a tawa player here. And the wall, the actual place to perform inside these temples, it's exquisite because it's just like a sound chamber. The music, it just reverberates, and it really is lovely. So I wonder if you see actually right inside the sanctum. This is a Vishnu Temple. You can see because of the symbol right here, and an album like that. And so the space was very small. So originally the dancing would have been performed in a space that's probably not much bigger than about this big. That then controlled how the dance was to be done. Very, very contained. So originally when I studied the dance with hereditary people, they would get so annoyed because new people were doing lots of jumps and moving around the stage. And now, of course, because the dance is done on a big stage, and it's done in a big arena, the whole choreography choreography, the whole nature of the dance is totally changed. Once a solo form, it's now very much a group form. There were a few group dances that they did, but basically it was a solo form. But now, we get bored, we can't. It's often we have to see more things going. So basically the whole structure of the dance is changing because the venue where it's performed and the expectations are different. So I mentioned then that the dance was involved as part of temple ritual. So we can see here these dancers right here. She has her hand like this. Now a dancer was auspicious, very auspicious. So I have performed at several Hindu weddings, and they have not broken up. It's very auspicious. It's very auspicious. At our own wedding, we had a dancer. My best friend, Usha, performed. She danced. We had lots of dance teachers there, and we are still together. So if you want your wedding to be auspicious, have a dancer there. But a dancer was auspicious in every way. So whenever you were signing a contract for a house or some big deal, you would have a dancer there. This was the way. She was nitya sumangali, ever auspicious. Why was she ever auspicious? She could not become a widow. She was married to the god. Being married to the god meant that she could not become a widow. And so therefore, within this community, I mentioned the Ishevalala people, there were the dancers, but there were also the teachers. The teachers were the men, and they could marry within that community, but if they had a daughter, and they taught her dance, she then could not marry. So you can see within that community they were running out of a lot of girls that could then marry men, because the girls that became dancers couldn't marry, and so the community was quite small. So we have a god being taken out in procession. These women then were getting rid of the evil eye, and I think a lot of you know about the evil eye. And so therefore, they were getting, by moving their hands like this, they had fireworks. And so we have the Vishnu, Surya, on a horse, here, the Lord Vishnu, and he has the conch and the discus. So we'll just try that. Can you take your hands like this? Can you show me the discus? Okay, and then the conch. So this is how we know that this is Vishnu. And he is seated on the horse. How does Vishnu stand? He stands like this. Everybody put their finger down. There we go. So we have Lord Vishnu riding here. You can see then that they're getting rid of the evil influence, because when he comes out of the temple, when he leaves the temple, you have to make sure that there aren't sort of the evil eye doesn't come upon him. And you can see the musicians. Now these women were from the Ishevalala community. The musicians were from the Ishevalala community. But, as I mentioned before, if these musicians married, or if the dance teachers married, those women would not be dancers. So many of the people that I studied with, I was always curious. I used to say, Master, why don't you just teach your daughter to dance? And they used to say, no. And I said, why not? And they said, no, just no reason, no. And so they would never teach their daughters to dance, because then they wouldn't be able to get married. So what has happened within the dance community is these masters now have died. But the girls were always around the house. They were, when you were friends with them, you were hanging around. And so then you'd say, come on, I know you can remember that. You sat in that in our class for so long. Come on, let's put this together again, what you remember, what I remember. So now we have a lot of women teaching dance, because it's this sort of the hang around method. They were just there. They were always there, or they become musicians or whatever. And so it's a very important system when they taught in their own homes. Because you would go to the master's house, you'd have breakfast, and then the kids would be around. And so that is how that whole great artistic melange was broken up. It was built up because of just being in the home. Now we don't have it as much. We have institutions, and people go to institutions, and they sign up for a degree and things like that. But in those days, actually the kids were at home doing, studying dance or music. The girls, of course, were just doing housework, waiting to get married, but subconsciously learning dance. Now we have, this is a very interesting photograph. This is by the Tanjore Palace in Tanjore. And this was the time during Marathas. And as you can see, they were performing Kathak. So you can see they were performing Kathak. They're carrying a huge palanquin. So and it's a great occasion. And again, dance removes all obstacles and anything inauspicious. So we have them moving in procession. And as you can see, it's more of the North Indian type of dress that was worn actually in the Marathi court. So then there arose a whole repertoire, actually in Marathi, within the South Indian style called Bharatanatyam. So there's always been a lot of imitation. Now I thought you'd like to see Shiva, who's one of my favorite deities. Here's Shiva, and he's riding on a bull. Can everybody show me the bull? Got the bull. Okay, and then here is Shiva, the elephant's bull. Here we are, and he's on the bull. So we have Shiva on the bull. Again, we have a temple dancer. You can see her, she's very auspicious. You notice here that because they worship the god Shiva, they have the ashes going this way, because they're going to put on their auspicious ashes. Originally in Chennai, everybody in the morning, it was very, very rare to see someone that actually did not do, whether they're a Vaishnava or a Shaivite, that within the Brahmin community in the morning, they always had the line, so you could always identify them. Most people were wearing dhotis and things in those days as well. This, of course, is an older painting. But you can see then there's the auspicious yak tail fan waving here, and we have Shiva then being taken in procession. And this type of activity still goes on, but of course, it's different. So I thought you'd like to see Chittambaram. So again, in Chittambaram, you have Kartikeya, Subramaniam, being taken in procession on his peacock. Because as all of you know, every deity has a vehicle. So let's do the peacock. Can you put your hand like this? Okay, and then like this, and we have the peacock. So everybody has the peacock. And then again, it's a male. So Kartikeya is on the peacock. Kartikeya has two wives, you can see them there. These are all made of silver and gold. So again, we have the military that we have in the other picture. Now we have Ganesha with the trunk. So everyone can show your trunk. Remember, we did our trunk before. So that was just an elephant in general, but this is Ganesha. And of course, as you know, we all worship Ganesha before any difficult activity because he is the remover of obstacles. Ganesha. These are the two sons then of Shiva who's coming here on his bull. And everyone show me the bull again, please. There we go. So this is again in Chittambaram. And many of you have seen these hangings, and I use them myself in the dance concert. They just make very nice home decorations and things. But this is when Shiva is being taken in procession of the deities. Now the deities come out at certain times, just as within the Christian church, they take their images around too, to meet everybody. Just to remind you, there's a temple here, you can worship. And so in some of the Latin American countries, the Virgin of Guadalupe, she goes around here to Mexico, and there was great excitement. It was just like something they were all getting so ready to have her, and she was visiting. And so it's the same thing here, that they take the deities around outside so that then people remember that God is there and there is a temple in town. And I thought you might like just to see how beautiful it is. You can see, lovely, the workmanship, the gold and the silver. And then, of course, the exquisite garlands. You just go in there and you intoxicating the smell. And then the beautiful silks. So these images then are taken around at certain times and then returned. Now I mentioned that teaching was usually at one-to-one in the home of the teacher. In this case, it's Indira Rajan. She's from South India, and she is from the Ishe Valala community. And this is her student. She's a high caste person, a Brahmin girl. She's actually touching the Tathagata and saying, now I'm going to have my class. Now I mentioned then that the women were not allowed to marry. However, in 1947, at independence, dancing in temples was, and reserving women to just be dancers was outlawed by independent India. So then, all these women who had been trained to be dancers and were part of the temple tradition no longer had a job. If you were a temple dancer, by and large, the temple would supply a nice, home, and I visited those homes right in the temple area. They were given paddy, given some sort of. It's very much like a government job. That's what they did. They were part of the whole religious ritual. But when it was banned in 47, it meant that these women didn't have any job at all. Now, the other problem was, having been married to God, which was part of their tradition, which I'll tell you in a minute. Many men were worried about actually marrying them. One of my dance teachers, Swami Saraswati, she actually, her husband, he was very interesting because he used to tell me how it was just terrible. But he decided that he was going to marry her. He was a high caste person, he was a Brahmin, and she was a temple dancer. And so they had such difficulties that they had to move to Delhi, he said. So that was where I actually studied with her, is that because of her actually getting married, the community was really quite upset. Now I mentioned that the temple dancers were not allowed to marry. So young girls then, they trained as dancers, and then they were actually married to the deity. So more important than their dance training was to be married to the deity. Then they had their first performance. The first performance is called an Arangetram. At the Arangetram, she would receive her ankle bells, and she would first perform publicly. At that time, all the wealthy people, the Chettiars, the high caste people, would come and would watch this dance performance, and they would appreciate her. She would be probably 12 or 13, just ready to be married. And someone in the community would actually propose to her mother that he would keep her for a while. Okay, so now this is called an Arangetram, and I think many of you have been to Arangetrams and seen. Because now it's a whole different thing. So you present your daughter at an Arangetram, but the initial purpose of this was for the girl then to launch her career and to get a patron. Because if you're going to live properly, you need to have a patron. And so that she was then kept by this man who had a lawful wife. But the most interesting thing about this tradition is the fact that she could be educated, she looked after her children. So she wasn't, it was an interesting life. And a lot of these women are the ones that have kept the artistic knowledge of India alive. And they're very, very, very interesting ladies. Meanwhile, the wife at home, during that time, she would just be like having children and things like that and not able to have the same rights. But what is so interesting is that the whole dance repertoire, if you turn on the lights now, I'll just, what I'll do is I'll introduce you to some of the dance repertoire. This is the secular dance repertoire. So, as I mentioned, they performed in two places, one in the temple and one outside. So they moved freely because there was really no line between the secular and the religious, not to keep their business. So, I know all your secrets. I understand your devious ways. You and I married. But that man over there has turned your head and stolen your heart. What's a strong man like you running after a girl like that? Here, just boss me around. There, money is no object. Here, you sweat the accounts. Don't think I don't know what you do. So this is from the traditional repertoire, and only men usually would be watching this. Now so it had a very interesting underlay, the fact that people knew that this was going on in the village, in the communities, and it had a very accepted place. So both women had an accepted role, because the women, and they were then nurturing the art, and as you know, the art became highly developed because it was helped by this particular group of people. So many of the people that I did study with, and I have studied with for many years with Bala Saraswati, and she was one of the most celebrated temple dancers. And it's really interesting because she had a brother who was a mridangam player and another brother who was a flautist. And so it was very interesting just to see how that family operated, because in those families it was the women who were powerful, because they were actually more they were bringing in the money and things like that. And then she started to tour a lot, so really she wasn't able to teach. So she was touring, going to Japan and different places like that. So then I started studying with her Natubana, the man who conducted her performances. He then was married to a woman, and as I said, he had all these daughters, and I said, Master, why are you teaching your daughters? He said, because I don't want them to become dancers. And so he didn't teach his daughters. So at that time, it was a really exciting time. At the same time, many of you have heard of Rukmini Devi, a high caste woman, a Brahmin woman, who decided, as part of the Indian independence movement and getting in touch with Indian culture, that she would study Indian dance and become a performer. Now this was absolutely devastating to the Brahmin community to have a high caste woman perform on the stage. Not only that, she married an Englishman. And as she said to me, she said, it may have been bad to dance, but when I married an Englishman, we had to move to Australia. It was so they went away. So this is a very, very interesting lady. And so very, I was so fortunate. I mean, the trouble is with all these interesting people, they're sort of around, and you think they're not going to die. And I remember I was doing my research for Oxford. This is this book here, in the Temple Theatre, and I was talking to this one woman. I said, oh, yes, well, she said, you go now. She said, now. She put me in a taxi, and she said, you talked to her immediately. Well, luckily, because 2 months later, she died. I mean, so I had some really interesting conversation with her. So I discussed all of her life and how, as a high caste woman, she then founded the most famous dance school called Untitled Chapter. Untitled Chapter then was really for high caste girls. So it was very interesting to see how the dance has changed and it's become quite different and the repertoire has changed. So here I just thought you'd like to see the ritual that we do when we go to the teacher. Now, I can turn off the lights and we'll go on the side here. So now we're going to speak about the Lord Shiva, and I've chosen, I'm going to be showing you a DVD that we prepared with interculture. And one of our concerns is that people should see an artistic object and realize that there's more to be seen behind the object than actually just the object itself. So here we have Shiva as Nataraja. So he's dancing with his leg up, and many of you have seen this. Probably if you check in your jeans or something, you've got a little Nataraja there. There's a Nataraja restaurant. This symbol is all over. But who is Nataraja? It's Shiva dancing. And so I'd like you to look at the video, and I hope you get some insight then, and then we'll have some questions. So is that okay? And then we can... Because the women were not allowed to marry, and they were often considered to be used as prostitutes. And so therefore it was felt, you see, that if you were born as a young girl, it's one thing to decide as a mature person that that's your profession. But if you were born into that community and then trained up and then trained into dance and then not allowed to marry, so it was believed that then you should have free choice.
That was to liberate the dancers.
Yes, and it had a lot to do with women's rights too. I mean, obviously that you could choose then your own path, so to speak. And it's interesting how some people have said that they'd like to go back and be temple dancers, and that's not also being allowed. So it's quite interesting, those two things. Yes, does anybody else have any other questions? I'm just wondering, do you have any questions about the video? What you'd like to know more about? Because we're about to make another one. Oh yes, it's for sale. The video's for sale. You can buy it's for $10, and there's a booklet that goes with it. And unfortunately, you have to pay for it because it doesn't cover some of our costs. But yes, there is a copy of the video, and we would urge you to. We'd like it to get into schools and into colleges because there's so much that can be learned about in cross-cultural work when you take a really beautiful image such as Nataraja. And people realize that it's not just a hip little thing on on your yoga pants or something like that. Because if you look everywhere, it's used it. And it's just nice to see that there is it's a very, very beautiful philosophical concept. And also, it can train us to look at art in a different way. So we can look at artistic objects and realize that there is something deeper behind it. Does anybody else have any other questions? So I'll just sum up now then. I want to thank you very much because I can hear the team ready to come out. And I just wanted to say that if you are interested in seeing our performance, it's going to be on the 13th and 14th of April at Arts Court. And Arts Court is just behind the Rito Center. It's a lovely space. It's on the 3rd floor. It's a small theater, so you get out right close. And there will be back projections. The whole back will be absolutely full of different images. And the first half will be Bharatanatyam, and I'll be doing a Varnam, which is a traditional piece. And then I'll be doing the 9 moves in Avarasa in the Kathakali style. Then I'll be doing another Kathakali story, the story of Bhima going to the forest. Everybody knows the elephant now, so you'll recognize the elephant. And then I'll be doing a Chalana, which is one of the very vibrant pieces in the Chalana. The second half then involves several characters. And we're dealing with the environmental approach, the wisdom of the Buddha. Images behind this particular piece will be from Sikkim, the monasteries, and from Sikkim, from Ladakh, from Bhutan, and from different. So it's going. You're going to then learn the environmental wisdom of the Buddha. Now, according to certain aspects of, as you know, in many texts, there are changes to the actual stories and things. But one of the most beautiful stories is that in Buddhism, if you receive a boon, you drop water in gratitude on the earth. And when you drop water, you're saying, thank you, Mother Earth, for just something nice that has happened. And so the story is that when the Buddha was in deep meditation, he was disturbed by Mara, who's the god of death, who's coming to keep us in samsara, because we have to, and the Buddha is hoping to achieve enlightenment. And so the god of death is trying to stop his meditation, and so that he will not achieve that. So he attacks, Mara attacks the Buddha, and he doesn't, and he remains unmoved. And then Mara sends his 3 daughters, delight, discontent, and desire. The masks for this section are absolutely wonderful, I can tell you. These masks for this section, they're made in Saraikela, which is in Bihar, and so that they then personify delight, discontent, and desire. And so that then of course the Buddha still remains unmoved. And Mara says, all right, so you've been meditating there. Do you have a witness to show that you're now ready to attain nirvana? And the Buddha says, it will be Mother Earth. Because everyone who is offered, well, first of all, she's been here while I've been out in the forest meditating. And secondly, because the dropping of the water, she's received all everyone's thanks in the form of water. And so there's a glorious dance of Mother Earth, and there's a wonderful, wonderful headdress for Mother Earth. And so we see how that these stories can be taken and can be transformed so that they're meaningful today. And certainly, it's a very beautiful piece. So I just thought of that. And then we can reset the afterwards, and then we can go into again, and maybe we can do another session as well. So it's on the 13th and 14th of April. That. Otherwise, are there any other questions? We can bring up the tea, because the tea ladies seem to work. So we could ask them to bring it out, I guess.
5 minutes.
Thank you all very much.
5 minutes.
Yes.